My name is Uhuru Mofokeng, and welcome to the South African Book Review Sessions, your online political book club where everything political literature is dissected, is vivisected, and is eviscerated. When we started this channel, we promised to review a book every single day. So far, we've done that without fail. Please click on the subscribe button at the bottom of the screen for you not to miss out on any review of your favorite books. Today, we're doing our 9th book. It's a South African book by Dlamini. It's titled Askari. It is a book which has many subtopics in it, but the most standout subtopics are the following. It talks about basically the overall overarching topic is collaboration, deflection, and complicity. But then you'll find a story. You'll find a story of Cde September or Glory Sedibe, his life and times, his experiences, his abduction, and how eventually he deflected from being an MK commander, a full MK commander, to being an Ascari. And Ascari in this regard are those policemen who were trained as insurgents, and then they were captured and changed through torture or voluntarily to being counterinsurgents, meaning from there they'd work with the police to go and look for their former comrades, kill them, torture them, arrest them. The Askaris were just a pain in the ass for the national liberation movements in its entirety. This book gets into deeper details about Askaris. More especially, it uses the face of Glory Sedibe as the face of South African Ascari. He is seen as the epitome of selling out. He is seen as the paragon of selling out, because this man was a senior MK commander. He'd been trained in East Germany, he'd been trained in the Soviet Union. By the time he was abducted in a Swazi police station, he was the MK head of intelligence in Swaziland at that time, reporting directly to Lusaka MKHQ. And that itself made Glory Sedibe a big, fat sellout in the eyes of many comrades. Now, this book attempts to eviscerate some of the decisions behind Glory Sedibe's decisions. They try to put us in his position, try to make us sympathetic to some extent towards his cause, but then to some extent it raises a number of eyebrows. Like this book, in this book, I discovered that Glory Sedibe was accused already of being an apartheid agent long before the 1986 abduction. He was told, like, when in Matola when the Matola raids happened, he only got shot in the thigh, and apparently comrades were whispering in the corners that he shot himself in his own thigh, like shot himself. And then apparently in his own mission penetrated into South Africa after his training in East Germany. It came back as a total disaster. The comrades he was with got arrested, got killed. He was the only one to survive, and he always had that cloud of him hanging over his head that, nah, man, this man is not to be trusted. Chief amongst those who did not trust him, according to this book, was Ronnie Castells, the head of ANC intelligence for some time, didn't trust this man. So this is quite an interesting book, and is a big indictment to the liberation movements, both the Pan-Africanist Congress and the Africanist Congress and the African National Congress, because it claims that not just comrades or MK operatives or APLA operatives would be captured in operation. Sometimes they would volunteer themselves. Like after crossing into South Africa, a person would just abandon his responsibility as a freedom fighter or a revolutionary and go deliver themselves to the nearest police station and deliver a tell-all tale. And then from there being incorporated to the South African police and hunt down his former comrades. Some of them claim that they did so because of economic conditions, maybe. But then this book tells you a list of number of operatives who were were seen as Askaris. Now, you cannot talk about Askaris in the South African context and not talk about Vlakplaas, Eugene de Kock, and his death squad. Now, Vlakplaas in itself was a base for the Askaris. It's where the Askaris were based. It's where they operated. In Vlakplaas, it was an apartheid death squad under the security branch of the South African police, under the leadership of Eugene de Kock, a serial murderer who was convicted to over 200 years in prison, but somehow was released in 2018, 2017. He was released now, this man, and after serving a number of years in prison. Now, the very interesting issue about that is Vlakplaas was mostly a black-dominated apartheid squad. It was led by white people, I agree, but then a number of those operatives, almost all of those operatives were found there under the leadership of Eugene de Kock, were blacks, former trained by national liberation movements, now used to hunt down liberation movements. They were serious pain in the ass for both liberation movements, because these were people who've been trained. They know the jargon, they know the conduct, they can identify a comrade from a distance. So they could penetrate circles, they could be there. They caused a lot of harm to many families. They killed so many people, so many youngsters who wanted to go training abroad, and they'd come and pretend to be ANC operatives to give them military training inside the country and booby trap the landmines, the explosives, the firearms. In failure of those things to kill them, they'd kill them themselves. They devastated the country so much. They were bloodthirsty. Some of these guys were so bloodthirsty, even their white superiors were not comfortable with them, dealing with a number of cases. They tell us of a man called Joe Mamasai. It's not to comrade that thing, man. Tell us about Joe Mamasai, a serious sellout. Even the ones who were other fellow Askaris were also afraid of Joe Mamasela because of his bloodthirsty nature and his trigger happy character. And another common thing most of these Askaris had, besides the military training with the national liberation movements, these people were drunkards. They tell us they were susceptible to drinking, they were susceptible to dacha, they were susceptible to womenizing. And also another interesting thing, it was not only males who were Askaris. In this book, we're introduced to about 5 individuals, 5 female Askaris, also previously trained with the Pan-Africanist Congress, previously trained with the African National Congress, trained from abroad, trained in China, trained in East Germany, the Soviet Union, and various other parts of Africa. But then they were captured and they immediately deflected. Now, this book also gives me a reason not to feel sympathy for these people, though they were tortured very harshly. Some of them were seriously tortured. That's why they deflected, because the general nature of counterinsurgents. Also, this book touches on the nature and character, the background, the outlook of South African, of apartheid South Africa's counterinsurgency policy, how it operated within the framework of the national security management system, which was basically a small part of the total war strategy they had put into effect against the African National Congress. Now, the total war strategy, the apartheid government, especially P.W. Botha, more especially B.J. Foster, H.F. Verwoerd, and P.W. Botha, yes, these 3, they used this strategy. Basically, it was meant to counter the 1969 Morogoro Conference of the ANC, which took the resolutions that the ANC is going to adopt 4 pillars of its struggle: mass mobilization, underground military work, underground ANC work, and international solidarity. That means mobilizing internationally to isolate apartheid. The apartheid state saw that as a serious threat to its own existence, and it came up with the total war strategy to counter that. That means it decided to use counterinsurgencies, assassinations, kidnapping, abductions, and arresting without detaining without arrest. Sometimes people would even disappear during their times in detention. Now, it's this book tells you about how the counterinsurgents and how the total onslaught, the national security management system were all one thing, aimed at completely obliterating the advances made by the progressive national liberation movements. It tells deep of how the apartheid state went to other countries to learn about counterinsurgency. Hence, we learn of how it invested heavily in bringing about former insurgents to being counterinsurgents. These people had a choice when they were tortured. The book tells us they had a choice to not actually. They had a choice to die. How do you even have a choice to die? But they did have a choice to die instead of collaborating and selling out. Now, the book tells you of a very sad story of a lady called Pilandwandwe, who was 23 years old, a student at the University of Natal, who was once abducted by the South African police, the security branch. She was kidnapped, tortured, stripped naked, left in very inhuman conditions and hostile conditions. But then she would not collaborate. She chose to die instead of collaborating. She was stripped naked. She eventually took some plastic bags and stripped some form of underwear to hide her from her own nakedness from these guys. And she was killed. She was killed very shamefully. A story was discovered in 1997 after the TRC had heard a request for amnesty from a number of policemen who were involved in that particular abduction. A very sad story. If a woman like that could stand her ground, why couldn't a senior commander like Glory Sedibe? Cde September is a name you'll never hear in the ANC, because the ANC, it's clear, it will not glorify sellouts. The man was taken serious by the movement, but he sold out. The book tells us of many of his type. The book tells us that the ANC was so penetrated by enemy agents, it was not even funny. The ANC NEC meetings, the resolutions taken therein would reach the apartheid bureaucrats before it could reach the membership of the ANC. Like a meeting of the ANC, NEC would sit now, and after the meeting was set, the South African police would be having information on what was discussed then. It was later discovered that Francis Melu, who was once a representative of the ANC in London, along with his predecessor, Cde Smith, were agents of the apartheid security apparatus. Very sad. Senior members of the African National Congress sitting in the NEC were agents of the apartheid state. Now, those two comrades died just in 1994 under other conditions. They died. Now, it does not tell us about that only. It tells a very, very intriguing story in the final chapters of the book. It tells of a particular Peter Mokaba. This book argues that Peter Mokaba was a sellout, was an agent of the apartheid government. This book, that's why this book it tells us Peter Mokaba was an agent, and it argues that it was Oliver Tambo who intervened and spared the life of Peter Mokaba when he was supposed to have been executed in Zambia in 1990. It tells so many scary stories, and it tells of a story that how up until this very day, apartheid agents within the ANC are not known, and the National Intelligence Service made sure that it was not known. When it was convenient to them, they tried to push the ANC to publish the list, and the ANC saw that it was a divide and rule tactic, and it decided to push the matter under the carpet. So today we're being led by people whom we call senior revolutionaries. Tried and tested, what. Hey, some of those people are sellouts. Some of those old people who are in positions of serious power, who've been to NEC forever, those ones, some of them are enemy agents, according to this book. This book will show how weak the systems of the ANC were as far as its intelligence and its membership systems, its recruitment. It would sometimes recruit straight an enemy agent, and it find themselves there. Askaris also were not only black people. It is recorded that there were 2 Askaris who were whites. 2 Askaris who were former members of the ANC and became counter-insurgents. After one delivered themselves, one was captured. So it's an intriguing tale. It talks of selling out. It gives a historical and academic, scholarly context of collaboration. It talks of the nature of counterinsurgency, how much it does not consider people, how much it does not consider their concern, how much it does not see them as political beings, how much it does not recognize their political demands, only sees them as rabble rousers and problems required to be solved. It's a sad book. It tells a number of issues like who is leading us today? Are we being led by Askaris? Are we ever going to know about that? It tells the story also of the TRC, of how incorrect the approach of the TRC was, how much it actually did not play the role many South Africans were expecting it to play. They were expecting to see the TRC providing some sort of closure to the injustices of the past, to the hardships experienced by people, and only to find that the TRC was not concerned about that. It was just concerned about the tip of the iceberg, just a small portion of the truth, so that it can prove that indeed there was some sort of reconciliation attempts and some attempts at maybe reparations to some extent. But eventually this book covers a lot of things. It's an interesting book. I'm going to definitely read it again over the years. It's thought-provoking. It's seriously thought-provoking. It also talks about serious factions within the apartheid security apparatus, the antagonisms that existed between the South African police and the South African Defence Force, and how that affected the whole strategy of total war that the apartheid security apparatus in its entirety had adopted against the liberation movements. Now, this is a good book. The author is well read. He understands his topic very well. It's a different topic, talking about sellouts. He puts it in many contexts. He puts the selling out in many contexts. And it makes one to wonder and want to think very hard. It makes one to think very hard about the nature of selling out, about the nature of changing side and going to the end. It even talks about Bruno Mdolo, the first person to be known to have deflected from being a revolutionary, one of the founding fathers of Umkhonto weSizwe, to being the very first sellout of the revolution. And he was given the title Mr. X when he was a witness against Nelson Mandela. Now, Glory also was a star witness in the state case against a number of comrades in 1988. And hey, the man to listen to him and the interviews and his responses to questions, you can understand that no, indeed, apartheid won over a man who was respected very much as a comrade. Now, this is a good book with many issues. That basically becomes the disadvantage of the issue of the book. The author tries to raise too many issues, like a lot of issues. Yes, it makes it an interesting read, but if you're not well versed in the issues of security criticism, for example, you're going to struggle reading this book. If you're not well versed with the history of the African National Congress in its exile days, you are going to struggle with this book. And it has its own limitations. It is disliked by the ANC. It touches a sensitive topic. No one wants to be known as a sellout. There are many commissions which were put in place when comrades were called sellouts. One can remember the Heifer Commission, for example, which was put by President Thabo Mbeki to investigate the allegations that Mbulelani Ngcuka, the then dead NDPP, was an apartheid spy during the days of struggle. So it's a very touchy topic when someone calls you that. One of the black police officers who was very senior in Vlakplaas, a man called Almond Nofomela, threatened to sue anybody who called him an Askari. Well, he was right. He was never trained by anyone. He was never part of any liberation movements. He was just a policeman with a cold heart. Almond Nofomela, Joe Mamasela, a man called Mfalapitsi, Clad, and a number of other black special branch police were very brutal. They were more brutal than the poor policemen themselves. They went an extra mile, and the author locates that to the nature and general character of deflection, collaboration, and complicity. It's an interesting book. It raises many issues, tackles legality issues when it comes to the legal nature of South African apartheid laws, how they operated within the imagined framework of the law. It's a very incriminating book. It's quite an indictment to those who presided over the apartheid state, and it's an indictment to those who were leading the African National Congress from its days in exile to the transition to what was known as the democratic breakthrough in 1994 up to this very day. And it has left me with one question: are we ever going to know who these real sellouts are? But besides that, how do I rate this book from 0 to 10? I'd give this book a standard 5. I'd give this book a standard 5, just a 5. It has a lot of information, but it's just too many things, and it's difficult to read because he puts this here and comes back to it. It's just all over the place. But besides that, there are plenty of things we're going to read, and we might find a number of lessons. We're going to read and learn about comrades whom the ANC would not let you know, because the ANC is clear. It's not going to talk about Glory Sedibe or any of those who deflected from being insurgents to counter-insurgents, because the ANC does not glorify sellouts.